Crude and Uncalled For is the 14th episode of the 7th season of Two and a Half Men. This is directed by James Widdoes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And in general, it's an okay episode. I couldn't remember what happened at the end of this, and I was watching it thinking, I feel like something needs to happen. And realistically, other than the very dramatic beginning, which I'll talk about in a moment, nothing happens, but it is building us up to the next episode. Does it need to be 2 parts? Well, I can't fully remember exactly what happens in the next episode, so I'll decide that when we get there. But for now, this episode starts off in a bar. Alan is clearly on a date. He's talking about socks, and the woman he's with is also very clearly not interested. And this guy walks past her and says hello, and they start smiling, and he comes over and gives her a drink, which, well, to be fair, as Alan points out, she doesn't want me, but it's the principle. He didn't really have the right to do that while she was on a date. And we find out he's called Marcus, he's played by Mark Deklin, she's called Louanne, played by Lilli Birdsell, and Alan is really annoyed that even though it's very clear she wasn't interested in him, you don't just come over and flirt with somebody who's on a date with somebody else. So Alan punches him. Very uncharacteristic, to the point where I was waiting for him to wake up from a dream. But it wasn't. It's not a dream. He ends up in jail, and the next thing we know, Charlie gets a phone call from Alan to come and bail him out. But Chelsea's wearing something very revealing, and Charlie is otherwise preoccupied. So we cut to 10 hours later, and Alan and Charlie come back into the house. Needless to say, Alan's not very happy it took 10 hours, and Chelsea, being the good person that she is, and I emphasise that because I don't care for her, but she is such a good person, she's obviously very mad at Charlie. And the next thing we know, they're in the kitchen with Evelyn. I think if this was a nice way to bring Evelyn into the story, they're talking about getting a lawyer. Evelyn suggests that since lawyers are expensive, maybe he could just do a short stint in jail instead. Obviously, Alan doesn't want that. So Chelsea, again, being the very good person that she is, agrees to help Alan out. And this is the turning point. This is when we get to the part of the narrative where the focus begins to shift, because we're shifting a little away from Alan, and we're now focusing on Chelsea. And a character called Brad. And Brad is the lawyer, and they basically say, or he says to them, the guy's got some prior convictions. He doesn't want to go to court. He doesn't want to take this any further. Alan is obviously relieved. And then the lawyer's like, I'm not going to charge you for my time, which seems a little unbelievable. And Charlie is happy with this. But of course, Chelsea, being a good person, insists on giving him money for his time. And Brad, also being a very good person, we're really focusing on the fact that Brad is this amazing, charitable person. He's successful. He has a late wife, so there's an emotional aspect. And Chelsea always being a good person, but we're really seeing a lot more of that kindness and selflessness in this episode. She obviously tells Charlie to get his checkbook out, and he does, and he writes a donation for the charity event that Brad is involved with. And Chelsea is clearly interested in Brad, but I never got the impression that she was too interested in him. I never really felt like she was suddenly thinking, oh, am I doing the right thing by marrying Charlie? Maybe I should marry Brad instead. I never got that impression from her. But Alan does plant that seed in Charlie's mind. We'll come back to that in a moment, but first we have a scene in the kitchen that I think is quite funny. And this is because Charlie is up at night. Alan can't sleep. He's worried that he's unleashed a monster, because a tiny part of him really enjoyed punching that guy in the face. And he's worried that suddenly he's unleashed this monster that's going to go around being violent. So Charlie twats him over the head. Obviously, this is to prove that Alan didn't instinctively fight back. In fact, he had a reaction that definitely suggests he wasn't a fan of pain and violence. So, not that I'm agreeing with Charlie hitting him, but it was certainly very amusing, and Alan's response was particularly funny. So, Alan seems quite happy that he hasn't unleashed a monster. However, it is possible that Brad has unleashed a bit of competition, because Chelsea has gone off to the charity event, and Alan said, you let her go without you. It's not Charlie's decision to let her go. But nevertheless, Charlie wasn't bothered until Alan suggested that, well, as he put it, Brad is everything Charlie isn't. And I think it's safe to say in many ways Chelsea is everything Charlie isn't. And just with the little we know about Brad and how good of a person we know Chelsea is, it does seem like they would be a really good couple. So the next thing we know, they're both in the car with Jake, heading off to this charity event, and they get into car trouble. And then it gets dark, and Jake pranks them pretending to be a mountain lion. And eventually they get back to the house, and up until this point, still nothing has really happened. Alan punched somebody, they met a guy called Brad. That's basically the key plot points. But Charlie realizes that Chelsea's not at home, and Alan thinks, "Oh, do you think she's with Brad?" And now Charlie does, and there we have to be continued. And I remember, now having reached the end of this episode, I remember vaguely what happens next, but it's been a very long time, so I can't remember exactly how things play out. And I'm looking forward to rewatching it. So the episode itself maybe isn't the most dramatic, it's not the most exciting. We do have some good moments, but not a lot happens. But it does build up to the next episode. And as I said, I will decide with the next episode whether I feel like we needed a to be continued or if they could have condensed it into one ending. But I guess it's a pretty suspenseful ending, and I'm looking forward to rewatching the next one. And for now, needless to say, I'm pleased to say that even though not a lot happens, Crude and Uncalled 4 is still a decent episode of Two and a Half Men.